Joe Rogan is literally sitting there on his podcast, right? And you can hear it in his voice, that shift, like when someone realizes something deeper than what they signed up for. And he's not even being dramatic about it. That's the crazy part. He's just talking calm, but you can tell something about those Epstein files genuinely disturbed him. And we were all thinking the same thing at that moment. Okay, wait, is this just about Jeffrey Epstein again, or is this bigger? Because Joe Rogan didn't stop at Epstein. He started asking the question nobody in power ever wants to touch. What if Epstein wasn't the top? What if he was just one guy in a much bigger system? And the way Rogan said it, there's a million of them, like, excuse me, a million. That's when the conversation changed completely. So then January 30th, 2022, 6 happens. The Department of Justice drops what they call the biggest release in the Epstein case. Millions of documents, images, videos, just dumped online. And of course, everyone rushes in like detectives overnight. People are searching names, flights, locations, connections, trying to piece together who was involved. And then suddenly Joe Rogan's name shows up. Now, you know how the internet is. People didn't even wait 2 seconds. Immediately jumping to conclusions, but Rogan addressed it straight away, which honestly, I respect. He said, yeah, his name is there, but not for the reasons people think. Apparently back in 2017, Epstein actually tried to reach out to Joe Rogan through someone Rogan knew, a physicist, Lawrence Krauss. Epstein wanted an introduction, thought Rogan was funny, wanted to meet him. And Joe Rogan's reaction, he Googled him. That one Google search changed everything. He saw the 2008 conviction and he shut it down immediately. Like, not even a second thought, no thanks. And that right there, that tiny decision, that's what kept Rogan out of that entire world. But here's where it gets unsettling. While Rogan is going through these documents just to confirm his own story, he starts seeing patterns, not just names, not just random connections, a system. And that's the word he keeps hinting at, a system. Because think about it. If this was just one man, one island, one operation, it should have ended when Epstein died, right? But everything Rogan is saying suggests the opposite, that nothing really stopped. It just shifted. And then the focus moves to the people around Epstein, the ones who don't get talked about as much, but keep showing up in the background, like Les Wexner. Now, a lot of people don't even recognize that name at first, but you definitely know what he built. Victoria's Secret, massive brand, billionaire, extremely connected. And according to what people have been discussing from those files, Wexner wasn't just some distant acquaintance. He gave Epstein insane levels of access, financial control, properties, influence. That alone raises questions, right? Like, how does one man get that close, that powerful without serious trust from someone at the top? And then there's the whole situation where certain details connected to him were reportedly treated differently in documents. Some things visible, some things not. And that's where people start asking who decides what stays visible and what doesn't, because that's the real theme running through all of this. Control. Then another name starts coming up in conversations. Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, huge figure in global business, shipping, trade, international networks, the kind of person who operates at a level most people don't even see. And again, it's not about saying what is or isn't proven. It's about the pattern of connections, the scale, the reach. Because when names like that appear repeatedly in conversations around a network like Epstein's, it makes people wonder, how deep does this go? And that's exactly where Rogan's tone shifts from curiosity to something closer to concern. Because now it's not just about who was involved before, it's about whether anything actually ended. Because if the structure was bigger than Epstein, if it involved influence, access, power, social circles, then removing one person doesn't collapse the system. It just creates space. And that's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Who stepped into that space? Because think about how this whole thing worked based on everything that's been discussed. It was carefully built environments, places where powerful people felt comfortable, where everything looked normal on the surface, exclusive, high level, almost desirable. And then slowly boundaries blurred. That's the honeypot idea people keep referencing. Not in some exaggerated way, but in a very calculated, controlled environment where influence and access did the heavy lifting. And honestly, the scariest part, how normal it all seemed to the people inside it. Actors, celebrities, public figures, some of them later admitting they didn't even question it at the time. That being invited itself felt like status. Like Terrence Howard literally said he heard about people going and felt like he was missing out. Missing out, that's how normalized those circles were. And that's exactly why this conversation refuses to die. No matter how many times people try to close the case and move on, because Joe Rogan didn't just read names. He saw a structure. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Joe Rogan keeps coming back to that same idea though, and this is where it starts to feel less like gossip and more like, wait, why is nobody fully unpacking this? Because once you accept that it was a system, not just a man, everything else starts lining up in a way that's honestly uncomfortable. Like take Chris Tucker, for example. His name came up in connection with one of those flights. And when he was asked about it, he didn't deny it. He just explained it, said he went on a trip to Africa with diplomats and didn't really know who Epstein was at the time. And Joe Rogan's reaction to that, he was like, oh, okay, that clears it up. He was like, that actually confirms the list is real. Because think about it. If one person admits being on it but gives context, that means the list itself isn't fake, it exists. And everyone else on it, now people start looking at them differently. But here's the interesting part. Nobody fully denies anything. They just carefully explain their version. That's the pattern. Not full exposure, not full denial, just enough to protect yourself. And that's what keeps everything in this weird gray zone where nothing ever fully collapses. Then you've got someone like Howard Lutnick stepping in, telling this very strong story about how uncomfortable Epstein made him. Like he paints it clearly, walked out, never wanted anything to do with him again, completely distanced himself. And on the surface, it sounds solid until emails start circulating that suggest continued contact, even planning visits. And again, it's not about confirming every detail. It's about how often this same kind of contradiction shows up. Public statements, one way, background connections, another. You start noticing a pattern whether you want to or not. And then there's the media side of it, which honestly makes everything feel even more strange. Because in 2023, that film, Sound of Freedom, comes out based on real trafficking operations. And before it even hits theaters properly, it's already being labeled, criticized, pushed aside. 5 years, it sat untouched. No major studio wanted to pick it up. Then suddenly it releases and people actually go watch it, like really watch it. It performs insanely well at the box office, even beating massive franchise films. And what's wild is how audiences reacted. There's that story Jim Caviezel shared about screenings where people in the theater started whispering Epstein Island during certain scenes, like they were connecting dots in real time. Not because someone told them to, but because the structure felt familiar. The fake setups, the powerful connections, the controlled environments, it didn't feel like fiction. And that's where things start to blur again. Because if something looks like a pattern, sounds like a pattern, and keeps repeating across completely different sources, people start asking why it was ignored for so long. Even Cory Feldman, and yeah, people have called him a lot of things over the years, but he's been saying for decades that there was a deeper culture inside Hollywood that protected certain behavior. And the response he got, silence, pushback, being labeled unstable, which again, whether you believe every claim or not, the reaction to him is part of the story because it's always the same cycle. Someone speaks to, they get dismissed 2 years later. Parts of what they said don't sound so crazy anymore. And that brings it back to what Joe Rogan was reacting to. Because after going through all those files, his takeaway wasn't relief, it wasn't closure. It was dread because he didn't just see what happened, he saw how it happened. And more importantly, how easily it could keep happening. The whole idea of these environments being designed so carefully, where everything feels normal, desirable, even elite, that's what sticks. Because people don't walk into something like that thinking they're stepping into anything dark. They walk in thinking they've made it, that they're finally in the right rooms, around the right people, and by the time anything feels off, they're already in too deep. That's the uncomfortable part nobody wants to admit. It's not always obvious. It's not always forced. Sometimes it's built slowly, layer by layer, until it just feels like this is how things are. And then when everything finally comes out, everyone acts shocked. But inside those circles, it wasn't shocking at all. It was normalized. And that's why even after Epstein, even after Maxwell, even after all the headlines and investigations, people still don't feel like it's over because the question hasn't actually been answered. Not who was there, not who knew,